This is the last part of the Chapter 4 notes that we did not quite finish in class. So the last piece to the LSRL is interpreting the slope and the y-intercept for a given set of data. So we're going to do each one separately. The slope of the least squares regression line tells us how much the response variable, which is y, increases or decreases when the explanatory variable x increases by 1 unit. So it's always x increasing by 1 unit, and then y increases or decreases by the slope, whatever that number is. So for the golf scenario, for every 1 mile per hour faster the club swings, that is your x variable, the distance the ball travels, which is the y variable, I chose increases because my slope is positive by approximately. Now our slope was 3.17. So 3.17, we can round that off to about 3, and it's being measured in yards. So the ball travels an increase by about 3 yards. So again, for the golf scenario specifically, for every 1 mile per hour faster the club swings, that's the unit for the speed, the distance the ball travels increases because the slope is positive by approximately, and you can round off here, it's 3.17, but we're going to round that off to 3, and it's being measured in yards. So that is breaking down the slope for every 1 unit of x. For the y-intercept, it's different. The y-intercept of the LSRL is only appropriate in some scenarios. So you have to think about whether or not it's appropriate. It tells us where the response variable starts, which is your y variable, when the explanatory variable is 0, so when x equals 0. Which sometimes doesn't make sense, or it's outside the domain. Sometimes both of those things are true. So if it doesn't make sense, if you think about it and you're like, no, that doesn't make any sense, or it's too far outside of the domain. If it's close to the domain, and that's a judgment call, if it's close to the domain, it's probably okay. But if it doesn't make sense or it's too far outside the domain, it's not going to work. So for the golf scenario, if you look back up here, my y-intercept is negative 55.8 yards, which tells us that when x equals 0, y equals negative 55.80. So for the golf scenario, it does not make sense that the ball will travel negative 55.8 yards if the swing is 0 miles per hour. So that's like saying I didn't move the golf club at all and the ball flew backwards 55.8 yards. That number does not fit the scenario. If I don't swing the golf club at all, the ball should not travel. So this number does not fit the scenario, and if we look back at our input, all of our club head speeds are between 99 and 105. So we really can't say what's going to happen all the way back at 0. I really don't know what's going to happen. So it's too far outside of our domain. Now 98 miles per hour, 97 miles per hour, that might be okay. It's pretty close to the domain. Or 106, 107, it might be okay. But all the way back to 0, it's too far. So it's your decision. You have to decide if the y-intercept is appropriate for the given scenario. The textbook says if it's outside of the domain, it doesn't make sense. I'm okay if it's a little outside the domain, but it fits the scenario. So on your test, it's your decision. If you say it makes sense, you have to explain why it makes sense. If you say it does not make sense, you have to explain why it does not make sense. And I'll take your answer, yes or no, if your explanation fits. So it's more about your explanation of why it fits or why it does not. So that finishes up Chapter 4. I know it was just a quick little finish, and you have your review online, and you can email me anytime with questions.